Hey everybody, welcome to the briefing room. I'm Devin Dwyer. On this Friday, great to have you with us. Our senior investigative reporter Mike Levine is with us. Our White House reporter Jordan Phelps is here. A lot to get into on this day two after the Mueller report was fully released, the redacted version that is, but 400 plus pages of fascinating reading. Mike, we are going to get into in just a second the bottom line everyone needs to take into this holiday weekend about this report. A lot of nuggets in there. Also talk about the political implications ahead as we head into campaign season now that the report has landed. And we want to hear from you. We wanted to hear from what our viewers and voters are thinking about this report, so we'll head out onto the streets around Trump Tower, of all places, to hear what folks from across the country had to say about that, so stick with us. But let's start with the bottom line of this report. Mike Levine, we have heard so much of what's in these documents before.
These novels.
When it comes to Russian interference in the election, the purpose of the report. But the most fascinating element here is obstruction. What's your bottom line?
There are now 11 episodes that Mueller says look like obstruction. He said that he couldn't decide whether they amounted to a crime, but they did look like obstruction, and now Congress gets to decide. You know, Democrats certainly are going to argue that there was obstruction here.
Yeah, in fact, Mueller writes in the report verbatim, perhaps in a nod of what's to come, says Congress has the authority to prohibit a president's corrupt use of his authority. And so this report matters now because it's very much going to be a roadmap for Democrats, the president's critics, including some Republicans, to really study it, study the activities of the president, right, and consider whether it's an abuse of power, even if it wasn't criminal.
Right. We know already that the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee has already issued a subpoena to the Justice Department for the underlying documents here. And the Justice Department so far has been silent all day about this. So they know that this is where the fight is leading.
Walk us through, when we talk about obstruction of justice, I think people wonder maybe what is that or what does it mean? So much of it centers on intent.
Yes.
There were, though, as you mentioned, 11 instances in the report that Mueller said this could look like obstruction.
Yes.
We do have a graphic highlighting a number of them, and you can talk to some of these, Mike, but obviously the first one, the big one, was when he told Jim Comey, the FBI director, to let go of the investigation into Michael Flynn.
Yes, and that's where the trickiness of intent comes in. Mueller, in his report, raises the possibility that maybe what Trump was doing there was he was just sympathetic to Flynn, and that there wasn't the so-called corrupt intent necessary to file a charge. And
also, of course, the firing of Special FBI Director Comey was another big one. We know that his direction to the White House counsel on a number of occasions to get rid of Bob Mueller. And then I was fascinated. There's a lot of discussion here about the instances when the president pressured his associates on not cooperating with Bob Mueller. Another apparent attempt at obstruction.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Mueller raises in his report the instance where he called Michael Cohen a rat for deciding to flip and actually cooperate with the investigation here. You know, they talk about how Trump always praised his associates when they, like Manafort, when they refused to cooperate, but then he flipped on them when they flipped and started cooperating.
So as this argument now moves to the political realm, away from the criminal realm, Jordan, the president is already actively, aggressively staking out his side of this as we head into the campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. No apology from the president. He's declaring complete vindication. We know that, of course, that's not what the report does, but that's the spin we're getting out of the White House. And the president also asserting this concept last night that he couldn't obstruct justice if he wanted to. He sent out this remarkable tweet saying, "I had the right to end the whole witch hunt if I wanted. I could have fired everyone, including Mueller, if I wanted. I chose not to." So certainly no apology from the president.
And he does have an argument there, Mike, right? I mean, this is sort of the nut of where this thing goes from here, is how you view what the president's actions were meant to do, what meant to be. Was there a corrupt intent there?
Yes, and related to the firing of Comey, you know, Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, wrote a letter. The man who oversaw this whole probe wrote a letter recommending that Comey be fired. And Trump has said himself, listen, if I obstructed justice, then that means Rosenstein obstructed justice too. So again, it's so difficult to decide what the intent was.
So
here.
again, for everybody at home watching, your big takeaway headed into the holiday weekend, and we do encourage everybody to read the report. The full thing is on abcnews.com. But Mike, at the end of the day, you say focus on the obstruction section, make your own opinion.
Well, I think that's where Congress Congress is obviously going to focus on. So that's where we're heading to now.
All right, Mike Levine, thanks so much. Let's
you.
dig a little deeper into the report now and bring in our Justin Fischel, head of our White House and Capitol Hill unit. They're going to just step in and step out on this Friday.
No commercial break.
We also call you Fact Check Fischel because,
That's true, they do sometimes,
Justin, you are it's a big part of your job is to fact check.
That's why I wrote a lot of this down.
All right, excellent. Let's dive right in. In many ways, we were talking beforehand that this report is a giant fact check of so many instances we've been talking about.
It pulls back the curtains on a lot of things that, frankly, that the president called fake news, reports that he denied. We're hearing sort of in a definitive account that we can point to, presented to us by the Justice Department that says this is the truth. Let's
start with a couple of the big fact checks. We do have a graphic here. Bob Mueller takes on 3 falsehoods that the president promulgated over the past couple of years, starting with this one, Justin. Take this on. The president said definitively he had no contacts with Russia.
Now, this was sort of the original falsehood. This is what he said as president-elect back in January 2017. He told our Cecilia Vega there were no contacts between his campaign and Russia and, quote, nothing at all. That's what he said. Right. Well, he later shifted that narrative to say he never had any contacts and there's a good reason why he did that. The bottom line of the report is that there were a, quote, series of contacts, numerous contacts between the Trump campaign and Russia, Mueller determined, on a score of topics, from business connections, offers of assistance, invitations to meet Putin. I mean, there was a significant chunk of this dedicated to those contacts.
He also said he never tried to fire Robert Mueller. He looked in a camera, told the American people, never considered
it. Yeah, this was a big fake news claim. There was a New York Times story that said that he instructed his White House counsel Don McGahn to fire Special Counsel Mueller.
What did Mueller find?
That there was substantial evidence to suggest that he did do that, despite the fact that he called that story fake news and denied that McGahn ever did it. McGahn sat for 30 hours with the Special Counsel, and he told all. And what's significant about all these things is that there's corroborating evidence. He's not relying on one man's version of events.
Another big one in the report, Justin, to move on, is the president's dispute with former FBI Director Jim Comey about whether, in fact, he pressured Comey into dropping the investigation into Michael Flynn. The president said he never did such a thing in the Oval Office. Robert Mueller, in this report, says that's simply not true.
Yeah, he even denied at times having a one-on-one meeting with Comey. This is another part of the corroborating evidence that they determined was there. Sessions, McGahn, Priebus, they all said, well, wait a minute, he did ask for that one-on-one meeting with Comey. We all thought it was weird at the time. He did it anyway. And Comey wrote contemporaneous notes that he asked for him to let Flynn go, and he shared it with other people at the time. Mueller says case closed. That's what happened.
Jordan, all these things in this report, some of the ones that Justin's highlighting here, have prompted the president's Democratic critics to decry a culture of lying in the White House. And even Sarah Sanders, the press secretary, has been swept into this.
Yeah, the Sarah Sanders example is really interesting here, where there were these times where she said there were countless FBI agents that reached out to the White House.
She said this publicly.
Yes.
And we do have that tape. Let's play it.
Let's take a listen.
The rank and file of the FBI had lost confidence in their director.
What's your response to these rank and file FBI agents who disagree with your contention that they lost faith in Director Comey?
Look, we've heard from countless members of the FBI that say very different things.
And that was May 10th, 2017.
Yeah, that's what Sanders told to the American people on more than one occasion. Right. But then take a look at what she said to Mueller's team.
And she
said on the report, Sanders told this office that her reference to hearing from countless members of the FBI was a slip of the tongue, a comment she made in the heat of the moment that was not founded on anything.
So again, she told the special counsel that statement was not founded on anything, deliberately telling people
she said it was,
that they had received text messages, emails from the FBI community.
She said it was a slip of the tongue, but then she said it again the next day. And then she went back to George Stephanopoulos this morning and sort of doubled down on it. I mean, the bottom line is, this is what she told the special counsel's office under the threat of perjury, under oath, and that's what we should be relying on.
A lot of credibility issues in this White House sort of unveiled, affirmed in this report. And I should also point out the president himself, Justin, was targeted by Mueller here.
Yeah, and he was
called out, we should say.
He was called out, sure, of course. There were, there were a number of things, and of course Mueller wanted to ultimately ask the president his own questions and try to see what the president would recollect, and was never really able to do so. Had to submit those questions, and then as we learned when we read the report, 30 times the president said he could not recall.
Yeah,
when
we do
Mueller
have that page from the
was
report.
pressing him on
This
those
is from the
issues.
president, who has told all of us on numerous occasions that he has one of the great memories of all time. In this highlighted section there on volume 2, page C1, Robert Mueller writes, the president stated on more than 30 occasions that he does not recall or remember or have an independent recollection of information called for by the questions. Other answers the president provided were incomplete or imprecise. That was Mueller's words in response to the president. So the White House has a lot to answer to in the days ahead.
Absolutely, a real crisis of credibility, especially for someone like Sarah Sanders, who is there. It is her job to provide accurate information to the American public. We rely on her. She relies on us in that exchange of information. And so going forward, there are real questions of whether we can trust what she's saying. I'm also really interested to press the president on whether he believes all this stuff is still fake news, since so much of our reporting over the last 2 years has been borne out as true in this report.
So I think bottom line of what's going to happen, Volume 1 is going to be weaponized by the Trump team and the Trump campaign. They're going to say this says no collusion, no conspiracy to commit a crime. And Volume 2 is going to be weaponized by the Democrats and say they lie to us all the time, and they did, in many people's opinion, obstruct justice. And there could be an argument for that.
Justin Fischel, thanks so much for that. Much more on abcnews.com from your fact check.
It's up now.
Speaking of politics, let's segue to our Deputy Political Director, Mary Alice Parks, who's here. She will come in now as well on this Friday to talk about the road ahead. Mary Alice, great to see you. Also, as you're talking to your sources, I want to bring into this our White House correspondent, Tara Palmieri. She's down in Florida, where the president is kicking off his weekend. Tara, great to see you. Let's start with you, because as Justin was just saying, the president's team seizing on the collusion conspiracy part of this report, and the president's been on a tear this morning on Twitter.
That's right. They feel like a cloud has been lifted because of the collusion part, but they recognize that the obstruction pieces are very unflattering for the president. And some of his aides who are more sympathetic to him say that, he is he's new to this. He comes from the private sector. He doesn't know about accountability or ethics concerns. And while it appears that his staff went out of their way to go against his wishes in terms of firing senior Department of Justice officials, at the end of the day, they're saying that they had to do this. And it makes him look like he's not in command, but in a way, his staff really saved him.
And Tara, as the president, we were all struck yesterday, Jordan and I were talking here on ABC News Live about how the president left town without saying much about the report. He's seemed to be in a good mood, obviously, has been doing some tweeting, but now today he's out on the golf course with a conservative firebrand.
Right. I was told that he's really soaking it all in. He was a bit uncharacteristically quiet, but he has been through a bit. I mean, taking in all of this information, having to deal with the fact that many times when he denied certain instances happened, that his staff testified to Robert Mueller that these things actually did happen. I think he's grappling with credibility issues. I've talked to some of Sarah Sanders' colleagues who say, why did she lie about these things? She wasn't told to lie about these FBI agents who say that they didn't have trust in Comey anymore, and they're wondering. They see this almost as a gaffe and as something that's just shows a lack of professionalism, not just the credibility issues and the fact that, like it's been shown in this report, that a lot of the aides around President Trump felt compelled to carry out his lies.
Tara Palmieri for us at the White House. You'll be there all weekend tracking the president. Thanks, Tara. Happy Easter to you. To keep this going, let's bring Mary Alice back into this because we're hearing for the first time, Mary Alice, from some top Republicans who have been relatively muted since the report came out.
Right.
This one critical just moments ago.
Just moments ago, Senator Mitt Romney sent a long tweet, a personal statement. He says he wanted to take time to be able to read the report himself. And there's the beginning of it, saying that he is sickened at the extent of dishonesty and misdirection by individuals in the highest office. He talks a little bit in this report about how, yes, he is grateful that the President of the United States did not conspire with a foreign adversary, but he does so almost tongue-in-cheek, saying that would have taken us down a constitutional crisis. And so he's glad that government can go on knowing that that at least did not happen. But he says that the report is a sombering revelation of how far we have, quote, strayed from the aspirations and principles of the founders. So by far the most blistering response from a Republican.
Other Republicans follow suit there.
And it's worth remembering that Congress is out of session. A lot of members of both sides, of Capitol Hill on Codels abroad. I was talking to one staffer today that said, my boss is going to be out of the country for a week. People in war zones across the world, and I think that kind of changed the tone in Washington yesterday. It wasn't like Lindsey Graham and others like him who are normally quick to respond. Were forced to. There weren't reporters there in the halls of Congress because members of Congress were elsewhere.
And Democrats now seem torn about what to do next. That's sort of where this is headed.
I think that's exactly right. And you have to remember that Democrats have largely shifted to campaign mode. Speaking of the Senate, we have 6 senators that are already running for president, already running to replace the president. And when we talk to Democrats who are already in campaign mode, they say they still want to deliver their economic message. I had one quote from a campaign staffer that said Mueller and Trump will be the mood music going forward in all campaign speeches, but not the message. The message they want to carry forward still deals with health care, minimum wage, the economy, jobs. They're not expecting to see their candidates deliver major changes to the speeches these days. I think that Democrats feel like the winning message is still, let's beat this president in 2020. But it'll be interesting to see how those candidates respond to questions. They might not want to pivot in their message, but the voters will continue to ask tough questions about the rule of law, corruption, transparency, like you were talking about.
Yeah, Mary Alice, thank you so much, Deputy Political Director. Have a great weekend. Not just Democrats challenging the president, though, including one in his own party for the party's nomination in 2020. We caught up with former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is running a campaign against the president for 2020 just a short time ago, to ask him about the report and whether he thinks impeachment should still be on the table. Take a listen. You are one of the only Republicans so far directly challenging the president in the 2020 campaign. How much will this report by Robert Mueller factor into your case to the party for the nomination?
Well, I must say, when we finally got to read the report, I was horrified by it. Despite the conclusion of no conspiracy with the Russians, there's a whole lot in there about obstruction of justice, all of Volume 2 of the 2-volume report. And it's rough stuff. He's telling senior intelligence officials to lie. He's telling senior national security people to lie. He's telling his own legal counsel to lie. Fortunately, they said, we can't say that, Mr. President. He says, why not? They say, because it's not true. He says, he hadn't thought of that. It's kind of like a so what answer.
In light of everything Mueller said in the report, do you think impeachment should still be on the table?
I really don't think so. And I'll tell you why. It's not for legal reasons. It's for political reasons. Because the House could easily, there's more than enough evidence, much more than there was against President Nixon, and I worked on that case for obstruction. But the Republicans control the Senate, so it's very unlikely that he would ever be convicted in the Senate, where you need a 2/3 vote. So the upshot of, 15 months of impeachment proceedings might be that the House looks like overzealous prosecutors and the president comes out smelling like a rose. So I can understand why Steny Hoyer said impeachment's not a good idea, for political reasons.
Governor, setting aside the behavior of the president and his campaign, the report obviously documents so much, in so much detail, how the Russians interfered with our election. If you had been president back in 2016, of course, Barack Obama was in the White House, would you have considered early indications from the intelligence community about what the Russians were doing? Would you have considered that an act of war?
I don't know about war, but cybersecurity is serious business, and the Chinese and the Russians and the Koreans are absolutely at our throats there. And, what all the pros say is you got to figure out how to make it more painful for them to attack you and hack you than it is what they get from it. And that's highly technical. But, these countries are throwing everything they have at each other, both on offense and defense.
And what would you do differently if you were in the White House and you win your party's nomination in 2020 to make sure that we are secure against those threats?
Well, for one thing, I might listen to my national intelligence community every once in a while, national security and intelligence. I've talked to senior military people who brief the president. They say it is terrifying to brief the president because after 2 minutes, it's like a light goes off in his head and he can't focus and follow you any longer. This is a guy without a long attention span and unfortunately not much curiosity about the world and how it works. I really do think the president's so wrapped up in his own head that he will tune out externality. He doesn't really know when the lights are on, when they're off, when he's telling the truth, when he's not, whether he's on stage, whether he's off stage. I know that's a lot to say, but I'm basing that on his conduct in office.
And now challenging him for the party's nomination in 2020, former Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And for more on this now, the cyber threats we face coming out of the 2016 election and everything that was learned by the Mueller investigation, I want to bring in a cybersecurity analyst joining us now by Skype from Tampa, Florida, Larry Whiteside. Larry, great to see you. Sir, I want to start by asking you about something that really struck me in this report, which is that the scale of the hacking against the U.S. Political system was bigger than we thought. Also striking that Trump campaign officials were retweeting Russian bots. The Russians were organizing campaign rallies, dozens of them. How can we as voters and everyday citizens sort of snuff that stuff out? What can we look for?
Yeah, so it's tough, I'll be honest. So first, thank you for having me. As it relates to what regular everyday people can do, honestly, it's check your news sources. If you're not finding stories that you see reported to you from certain news sources in multiple places that are reputable, and ABC News, the CBS News, the CNN, and MSNBC, some of those places, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, you should question it. This is one of the biggest challenges of our election season, misinformation. And unfortunately, what has to happen more is we've got to hold the information sources more accountable, right? So these social media environments, the Twitters, the Instagrams, the Facebooks, we've got to do more as a society to hold them accountable to sharing proper information and checking the sources instead of allowing this to be a freewheeling event.
It's almost sort of like the old terror mantra of if you see something, say something. It's almost incumbent. You're saying it's almost incumbent on all of us to check our sources and say something if we see something phony.
That's correct, and it's easy to say. Unfortunately, the way we interact with social media, we're so quick to believe the first thing that gets put in front of us. We tend to then share it, and the problem just exacerbates itself. And so you may be connected to somebody that you think is a friend that you don't really even know, and we are quick to want to get likes and follows and all these other things, and our need for this attention that we miss, checking the beginning of where this started.
And Larry, Jordan Phelps here, what do you see as the biggest takeaways from this report, and what are the biggest lessons learned going into 2020?
So the biggest takeaways is the amount of effort being put into providing misinformation to voters. And I think the biggest takeaway is for voters to really check their facts, is to look at Politico, look at different things that we know historically have been good sources of information. We as voters tend to get challenged because we have this right-wing, left-wing mentality that happens. And so we begin to believe that certain sources, instead of them being independent, they are swayed one way or another. So we don't want to watch those sources, and we don't want to follow those sources because of our belief in them being swayed. So when a source is presented to us, whether it's factual or unfactual, and it is swayed towards a way that we tend to lean, we are quick to jump on that. So we as voters, we as Americans have got to do our own job in fact checking. But then I think ultimately the government actually has a job and a role in this to actually hold these technology companies accountable to the information sources and how they're sharing information. Ensure that they are allowing real people to share information, that we aren't falling for the same thing that we fell for before.
Larry Whiteside, cybersecurity expert, thank you so much, sir. Really good advice for all of us to take away in the aftermath of this report headed into the next campaign. Larry, thank you. We asked a lot of these questions to the new National Press Secretary for the president's re-election campaign just a short time ago. What lessons has the Trump campaign learned from the Mueller report? Here's my interview with Kayleigh McEnany. Robert Mueller detailing, aside from the president, a pretty extensive effort on the part of the Russians to intervene in our elections, sometimes unwittingly getting involved with the Trump campaign, organizing rallies for the Trumps, sending out tweet bots that others were retweeting. Has the campaign taken a look at that? Are you taking steps to prevent foreign involvement in your operation?
Well, a few things. One, I want to emphasize from the beginning that, again, there was no collusion. That's the words of Robert Mueller. Not only that, no coordination were also his words, his conclusions. So that's first. Secondly, we at the campaign will strengthen our cybersecurity defenses. We'll always act within the bounds of the law, as we did in 2016. But I think the question is really a White House one, and they've solved a lot of this when you look at the fact that in May of 2017, the president issued an executive order saying we need to strengthen our defenses to make sure foreign powers don't meddle in our elections. They worked with all 50 states and localities to ensure there are plans in place to try to avert this. It's an ongoing problem. It happened during the Obama years. The Obama administration was made aware that Russia was trying to meddle in 2014. It still happened. But this administration is trying to take every active measure they can to ensure that there is no meddling by any foreign power.
And the report does talk about, well, perhaps not criminal conduct on the part of the campaign when it comes to links with Russian officials, some unwitting interactions, perhaps. Some Americans might see that as inappropriate. Take, for example, the Trump Tower meeting in 2016 with the Russian lawyer who came in. I guess one question I have now is if a foreign official of some kind came to the Trump 2020 campaign offering dirt on whoever the nominee would be, would you guys take that meeting today in light of what we've seen?
We will always act within the bounds of the law. I'm not going to engage in a hypothetical, but I do think we have had the Trump 2016 campaign fully vetted, no collusion, no illegality there. But now the focus is going to shift, and I do think that there needs to be some reckoning for the Hillary Clinton campaign, the dossier, the role that played. That was foreign misinformation sent to the Justice Department via Bruce Orr, then sent to the FBI. Those are documented facts. So when we talk about foreign interference and opposition research, we really need to look at the dossier. We've been scrutinized at the Trump campaign. It's time to look into the dossier.
When you look at just how much the Russians meddled in our elections, does that give you any pause, what's detailed here, aside from criminality? Are you bothered as an American, as a political strategist, by the degree to which they fabricated personalities online, tried to influence voters on both sides? Does that give you any pause?
I think every American cares when a foreign power meddles in our election, but I would cite the Obama administration. I think it was President Obama himself who said not a single vote was changed. Every American's vote was counted. It was a free and fair election. That being said, we never want to see foreign meddling. Every American, no matter what side of the aisle you stand on, should care about that, and the Trump administration certainly does.
And you're the new National Press Secretary for the president's re-election campaign, so we'll be seeing a lot of you over the next few months, Kayleigh. I want to put a question to you that we put to Press Secretary Sarah Sanders a long time back when she first took the job. And in light of some of the reports documented misstatements, some might call them lies, coming from her in the White House, can you promise the American people and the voters that when you represent the president and you speak on his behalf during this campaign, that you're always going to tell the truth to the best of your ability?
Absolutely, and I've known Sarah Sanders for a very long time. My first job was for her father, actually. She's an honest person with great integrity. I can attest to her character, her honesty, her truthfulness. I will do the same, and I could only hope to be as truthful as I think Sarah has been.
That's great. And before we let you go, Kayleigh, what's ahead? When will we see this campaign, your re-election, president's re-election campaign, really rev up? We know there's a rally coming up on the 27th in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Give us sort of an outlook of the next 50, 100 days.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'll be in Wisconsin with the president. There are more rallies to come, as you can imagine. Can't get ahead of the president, but it's fair to say the president is energized and excited for this election. I think everyone notices how much he loves being around the American people and the rallies, and he's very pumped to get this started. I can tell you that.
It's certainly going to be one to follow. Kayleigh McEnany, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And Jordan Phelps, as the president gears up his campaign, we know there's a rally next week in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Democrats also hardening their defenses. It'll be fascinating to see, particularly with so many Democratic candidates in this race, how they are dealing with this cyber threat, because as we know from 2016, it didn't take much for that phishing email to be opened by John Podesta, and then all of a sudden, so much went wrong for them.
Right, and the reality, as Kaylee kind of points out there, is a lot of this is for the government, right, to protect our infrastructure here, and a lot of concerns that we're just not ready to protect against these threats.
So what are all of you thinking about all of this? We've heard from experts in cybersecurity, of course, politicians on both sides, the president himself, about the 400-plus page Mueller report coming out. We have been wondering what voters, what our viewers are thinking about all this. For more on that, I want to bring in Kimberly Brooks, our anchor up in New York, who's been tracking some of the social media reaction out there. Kimberly, great to see you. So break down some of the trends you're seeing online and on social media that might enlighten what people are interested in here.
Yeah, Devin, it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting exercise to look at the Google trends because they tell a lot about what people were doing when all of this was going on yesterday. So let's take one of the most popular keywords from the Mueller report story, for example, the actual word Mueller. Now, when we look at these graphs, they show interest over a period of time with 100 on the left side representing peak popularity. So you'll see in this first graph that in the last 7 days leading up to the Mueller report being released yesterday, there was literally zero interest until that Mueller report was dropped at 11 a.m. If you were able to actually click on that spike, you would see it was 11 a.m. Yesterday, and it was at 100. And then from there, it kind of dropped off again. Now I want to go to the last 24 hours so you can sort of see what happened in these after it was released. It just takes a minute to change it. And you can see there that there's a couple of spikes, but generally the interest has decreased. So people were interested, but it wasn't sustained interest the way that it was for the media outlets. And I think another very important thing to note and look at is the questions that people were actually Googling. So this is pretty interesting. If you look at the top questions, for example, on William Barr in the past hour in the United States from yesterday, you have questions like, who appointed William Barr? Who was standing behind William Barr? Where did William Barr go to law school? How old is he? And then if you look at top questions on Robert Mueller in the past hour from yesterday, one of the hours from when this came out yesterday, people were Googling things like, who is Mueller? What is the Mueller report? So what you see here is that while the media was working tirelessly to dig through all of these documents, the people at home were just keeping it pretty basic and looks like they needed a refresher. So not as detailed as we were here at the media outlets, but people were interested, but just not in the same way that we were.
Gosh, the people who were searching who is Mueller, they must have been living under a rock for the past 2 years with given all the attention. But hey, who is this guy, I guess, behind the 400-page report? Kimberly Brooks, thanks so much for fascinating stuff on Google. Have a great weekend, Kimberly. And we all, we weren't just looking at the stats. We were talking to real people. In fact, yesterday, Jordan, our Erica King here in the D.C. Bureau was out on the mall. A lot of tourists in town talking to people. A lot of interest over this holiday weekend in reading the report. And a short time ago, we sent out our producer Amari to Trump Tower in New York City, where there are a lot of tourists milling about today, to ask them what they think of the report and what questions they might have. Here's some of that.
There's enough in it to suggest that if the president didn't obstruct justice, he very much wanted to, and was only barely thwarted by some of the people in his own administration. In addition, the material on collusion, while not perhaps indicative of an out-and-out conspiracy, is equally worrisome in that it suggests that the campaign was very receptive to the idea of Russian interference, and that they tacitly encouraged it, if not openly.
If I would have did anything, just one of the things that he did, or they say he did, I'd have been in a courtroom. I'd have been in front of a judge. I'd have been getting indicted for something. But, this guy's like, he feels like he has a lot of power, and he's using that power.
Well, I would just like to see the country move on and Congress to start doing their job, which is taught to legislate and fix the problems that are wrong with our country.
think there's safe to say a lot of sentiment about that. It's time to move on in one way or the other. We will see where this goes up on Capitol Hill, Jordan. We'll also see where it goes in the campaign trail. A lot to come. We know a lot of you may be diving into the report this holiday weekend, or otherwise hopefully spending some time with your family. For Jordan Phelps, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. Have a great holiday weekend. Hope to see you back here next week in the briefing room.